Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to cover episodes 801 through 803, which will cover manga chapters 839 through 841. And yeah, these episodes contain a great deal of filler or redundant material, but I'll try and expand it enough with what we got to make it a worthwhile episode. Alright, so synopsis. Luffy continues to struggle against Cracker to the point where he has now run out of haki due to Gear 4th, and it's up to Nami to protect him. Meanwhile, Sanji is now contending with his brothers as they punish him for standing up to them on Cosette's behalf, which launches us into a flashback of Sanji's time as a child of the Germa 66 Kingdom. I guess Germa Double Six Kingdom. So yeah, there are of course a lot of differences because of the fact that these three episodes have so much filler. So the second half of episode 81 is completely dedicated to going over Sanji's backstory from the Baratie again. The manga does this a little bit too, but it really only shows us one panel of Sanji and Zeph stuck on the rock island, and then his goodbye at the end of the Baratie arc. But in between, we get a few new moments of Zeph scolding Sanji in the manga. But yeah, the anime opposite instead just basically show us the entire flashback again, just slightly shorter. The anime also shows off a bit more of Luffy versus Cracker and even shows him running around and also running out of stamina in Gear 4th. But the manga never actually shows this part, and in fact, we wouldn't actually see the continuation of this fight until the end of Sanji's second flashback, which is still several more chapters away, and by that point a huge chunk of the fight basically passes off screen. In fact, yeah, like I said, 801 is largely filler, as only the middle 4 minutes where we see Sanji save Cosette and scolding Niji is the actual canon part in the manga. Similarly, large portions of episode 802 is also filler. However, I think the stuff they added is somewhat relevant, as we see more of what happened with all of the off-screen stuff in the Luffy vs. Cracker fight. It does kill the pacing quite a bit, but when reading the manga, it does cut out a huge portion of this fight, and we don't even return to this fight for nearly 3.5 chapters until Sanji's second flashback is complete, and even then, it's only the last panel of chapter 841, and the actual continuation of that fight really doesn't begin until the beginning of chapter 842, and by then, a lot has happened, and you're left kind of piecing things together as to what happened through dialogue clues. It definitely is a little clunky for sure. Similarly, after the scene, we get a Brule retreating into her mirror world, after taking that lightning hit from Nami. We also get a scene with Chopper and Carrot looking through the various mirrors trying to find Sanji. The anime also has a scene added where Cosette is thinking about Sanji and how he just saved her, along with Niji coming up behind her really angry. But in the manga, we don't get to see this, and we immediately jump to Sanji just finding her all beat up on the floor. Now, during the examination part of Sanji's flashback, we get to see each test in its entirety instead of a panel montage like in the manga. In the manga, we typically only get one panel for each test, but the anime, for example, shows us each kid jump off the balcony instead of the manga only showing us just the moment of Yonji leaping off while Niji is kind of still in the air from his jump. Another minor change that I noticed this time around is when Sanji is beaten up for caring about the turtle during the class. The anime has the turtle on its back kind of flailing about like Sanji is on the ground, but in the manga, the turtle is upright and kind of just standing near Sanji's head, almost like it's trying to support Sanji. And I kind of wonder why they changed it. Like, I can almost interpret the manga version as like, despite Sanji's inherent weakness, his caring feelings for the turtle has kind of come across, and the turtle appreciates it and is therefore kind of trying to support Sanji during this sort of beatdown. While in the anime, it seems like the turtle is actually used to symbolically show how helpless and vulnerable Sanji is at this stage in life, because you see the turtle kind of on its back just flailing about because it can't move anymore since it's on its shell. It's a very interesting change. I don't know which one is ultimately better, but yeah, I wonder why they changed that. It seems really weird to change something like that, but those are kind of the main changes that I saw. Obviously, there are a lot of changes in the episodes because of the fact that I would say almost like close to 70% of these three sets of episodes is all filler or things that weren't found in the manga. I think they're still relevant, and I'll get into a bit more detail as to why I kind of like some of the stuff they did add, but let's get into the episodes themselves. So, starting off with these episodes, we get a bit of Luffy continuing to struggle against Cracker to the point where he has been worn out of Gear 4th. But as I mentioned, this was filler added for the anime, so I'm going to jump ahead to our first canon scene, which is where the last episode actually left off with Sanji defending the Vinsmoke head chef Cosette from Niji. In this short scene, though, there is a lot, as we continue to see that Reiju is actually quite amused with this, remarking quite gentlemanly, which we continue to see that she is different from her brothers, and we'll get into this a little bit more into the flashback too. And, her brothers are pretty stone cold faced during this, and she actually still shows some kind of emotions. Sanji then, true to his rival on his crew and captain, does not hesitate to show that he respects and cares for hard work that people put into food by eating something off the ground and appreciating how delicious it is. In particular, calling back to Zoro in Shell's town when he was introduced, eating those muddy rice balls from Nika. And of course, Luffy on numerous occasions will eat pretty much anything from anywhere, even if it's on the floor. But Niji gets furious with Sanji at the shame he's bringing by acting like a common peasant eating things off the floor, and tries to attack him for it until Judge stops him, not for Sanji's sake, but so that he doesn't ruin the wedding. Sanji then yells back that the real shame that he feels is the arrogance that the rest of them feel just because they are royalty. What's interesting to me about this is that if Sanji hated being associated with his royal family, I wonder why Sanji always liked to use the Mr. Prince moniker, or playfully referring to himself as a prince. My sort of headcanon is that he started using this on Little Garden after meeting Vivi, and maybe saw that being royalty doesn't automatically mean that you are arrogant and cruel. It is possible to be a royal yet kind and compassionate, just as Vivi had displayed. The Vinsmokes definitely echo the classism theme, though, that permeates the rest of the world of One Piece, and literally our real world. That idea that because you are wealthy or powerful or influential, the rules don't apply to you, and that you are better than everyone else, and that they're there to serve you. The sad thing is, this ideology is so ingrained at so many levels, whether it's the nobility or royalty, and then you have the ultimate version of this disgusting ideology of the Celestial Dragons. Judge then reminds Sanji that they're holding Zeph and everyone on the Baratie effectively hostage. Something that's not as apparent is the fact that all of this leverage was given to Judge by Baron Tamago and Big Mom. Like the intel on Sanji, as well as the idea to hold Sanji's hands hostage with the explosive wristbands. Like, for someone who is supposedly as powerful and smart as the king of the Germa Kingdom, this little detail does kind of paint Judge in a little bit less of a capable light, showing that behind all his tech and intellect is a man who is actually kind of weak and stupid. Throughout this arc, they constantly mention that the power of Big Mom and an emperor is this network and influence that they wield, not so much just the raw strength of Big Mom and her crew. Judge seems to have forgotten this and is only focused on gaining more power for himself. He didn't even think to come up with these contingencies on his own when he's the one that needed Sanji to make this deal, succeed. Now, this next part isn't depicted in the manga, but I still kind of want to dive into it since it's implied that it happened, and I actually like that we get to see it. And that is Nami coming to save Luffy once his Gear 4th runs out and he's unable to use Haki for 10 minutes. Nami, with the help of Big Mom, and her Vivera card, she protects Luffy while using King Bomb and the other homies to even attack Cracker. And this part is frankly awesome and hilarious. It just shows once again the raw strength isn't the only way to be useful, as without Nami, Luffy would have died 10 times over, up to this point. And this is yet another example of all of Nami's best qualities coming into play. Her ingenuity and cunning allows her to not only come up with this idea of using the homies, but to actually put that into practice. And also, let's not forget that it was Nami's kindness, compassion, and loyalty that allowed her to befriend Lola and receive that Vivera card in the first place. And so you see all parts of Nami kind of coming together to just show how strong and capable Nami is. Lastly, the courage that Nami shows when someone actually needs her is always something that gets lost. She will often get scared and cower when there's when there's someone else to rely on, even if it's only Usopp. But when it's literally all on her, she will stand up to someone and some of the most fiercest opponents, whether it's Arlong, Enel, Khalifa, or even someone as outrageously stronger than her like Cracker. I really like seeing these scenes with Nami holding her own against Cracker, as it really shows her immense courage and loyalty to Luffy. Again, I like that this was added because it's never explained how Luffy got to where he ends up when we see him again. In the manga, it literally jumps ahead in what I can only assume is at least several hours. And I can't really talk about it in this podcast episode due to spoilers, but a lot of time passes without us seeing any of this fight. Now, that's not to say that Oda's writing is bad, because he gives us enough clues to understand what took place in that gap, but because he's limited on time and pages, he just couldn't fit all that in. And the scene following this, when Cracker does catch up to them, also sees when Cracker chopped off King Bomb's top foliage. In the manga, again, we don't see this, so the next time we actually return to the story, for some reason, King Bomb's head is just randomly chopped off flat, with just this throwaway line of dialogue to explain what happened. So again, I actually don't mind seeing this. And I think it almost seems like Oda maybe wanted to include this, but he just didn't have the time or the pages to do so. But then again, seeing what this does to the pacing of Whole Cake Island, having all these inserted in here, it does really just affect the pacing. Like, this fight does seem like it drags on, because in reality, that's the whole point of the fight. It does drag on. And I think maybe that is why Oda decided to just jump ahead, because he didn't want to, burden us with having to see this really drawn out and long fight. Although in the anime, that's what happens. And honestly, it really does kill the pacing. It is kind of frustrating to watch these episodes. It's like, come on, let's get to the point here. But it is supposed to be a very drawn out fight. So I don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum from a storytelling perspective. But when we return to Sanji's part of the story, he finds that Niji has beaten Cosette to a horrific degree as retribution for Sanji's insolence and embarrassment. This, of course, angers Sanji, with Yonji appearing out of nowhere, offering to take him to Niji. But this seems fishy, as he seems all too eager to take Sanji to Niji. What I thought was going to happen was that Yonji was going to lead him into some kind of a trap, but instead we take a very weird turn into the sci-fi, where Yonji shows Sanji this vaulted underground laboratory with hundreds of vats of Germa 66 soldiers seemingly being grown in them. It makes a bit more sense why Judge was so comfortable in sacrificing his soldiers when he was fighting Sanji earlier during their duel, because they're not real. I mean, they're alive, but they can be reproduced. Although this doesn't necessarily absolve Judge of anything, really. He's still a cruel and, mean guy. This is when we get some huge world building and lore dropped on us by Yonji. In this scene, we learn that Judge was working with Dr. Vegapunk in their younger days and had discovered that Yonji refers to something called bloodline elements, aka the blueprints of life. And this was mostly the genius of Vegapunk, but Judge then kept working at it after Vegapunk had folded himself into the world government. And we will learn much more about this sort of scientific group later on in a cover story about their time working together, along with two other characters, one of which we've met and the other we haven't yet met. But this discovery led to the invention of cloning. And this, you can see that Vegapunk kind of had a similar idea with the pacifistas. While the pacifistas themselves aren't organic clones, they're basically machines built in the image of Kuma. But Judge seems to have completely taken it over, allowing him to make a clone army a la Palpatine and the Empire from the Star Wars prequel trilogy, which is another allegory to the Nazi regime. Like Palpatine's clone army, these clones too grow at an accelerated rate of 5 years to mature into adulthood. These soldiers are also then augmented and enhanced as well. This then brought a few thoughts in my mind when I first read this chapter. For example, is Sanji and his siblings a clone of some sort, in terms of a genetic experiment to create super soldiers from scratch? And to be honest, I really hated the idea that Sanji was a clone or a genetically built person. I think it's an interesting avenue to take a character where they're a clone that defied their programming to become good and kind. Again, very similar to the clone soldiers in Star Wars, especially when you've watched the animated series like the Clone Wars, Bad Batch, and Rebels, and you see characters like Rex and the Bad Batch themselves. But I really wanted Sanji's personality to be rooted in his humanity. On top of that, the other thing that I immediately thought of was, with this confirmation that cloning tech does in fact exist within the world of One Piece, is that it further cemented in my mind that Weevil, the newest Chibukai, was actually an early incomplete test of cloning, and specifically cloning Whitebeard. That's why Miss Buchan is so confident he's Newgate's son, and why he has similar traits like the oversized body and the immense physical strength, but he's somewhat mentally stunted and physically underdeveloped. And so it's kind of like cloning, like he was maybe like one of the first clones that were tested, but it didn't quite go right. I'll talk a little bit more about this in the spoiler section about what all this leads to and what it could mean for the future. But let's move back to Sanji as he gets his chance to punish Niji for what he did to Cosette and gets a kick into his face and slammed back into the wall. But the crazy thing is, Niji, while looking like he took some serious damage, like Yonji, he almost mechanically repairs himself by like lodging his jaw back into place like it was a mechanical part. However, like I predicted, this was kind of a trap as they brought Sanji down here so they could beat him up by preventing him from fighting back, using the Baratie as a threat, and from there he just gets pummeled. Niji displays his electric blue ability, which looks like he can just infuse electricity into his physical attacks, and he freaking knees Sanji right in the back, which looks incredibly painful. The attack that he uses, Henry Needle, translates to electromotive needle, and for those wondering like I was, Henry is a reference to the fact that Henry is a unit of electrical inductance named after the American scientist Joseph Henry. I always thought, although the fact that they even have to hold the Baratie hostage for them to beat Sanji kind of shows me that they probably aren't as confident they could beat him. I believed at this point that he could have beaten them, and we already know he's capable of beating Yonji, so yeah, I don't know. I do think that this kind of shows their sort of... It could be viewed in different ways. It could be that they're already cruel enough that basically they will take any advantage possible just to beat someone down, or they're afraid of Sanji and they just use that to kind of keep him back and get an easy win. As Sanji lays there on the ground, though, this is where we launch into the main portion of Sanji's second flashback, which details his time as a child before ever even being on that luxury cruise liner at the start of his first flashback, when he was being raised alongside his brothers and sister as an enhanced child soldier. The flashback starts off with all 5 kids being put through a battery of tests and obstacles to measure their strength, durability, endurance, speed, agility, and general athleticism. And these tests show just how much weaker Sanji is compared to his siblings, to the point where he can't even complete any of the exams, really. And in a fight, he doesn't even stand a chance. After the exam, the results show that Sanji was a failure in terms of enhancements and is just a normal human. But one cool revelation by the scientists during this report to Judge was that each of the siblings has an exoskeleton skin, which is what gives them enhanced durability. And I kind of think that despite Sanji's lesser status, that he still has some of this, because he gets hit by crazy hits throughout the series and is still somewhat okay. I mean, he has taken some insane hits over the years. And so I do think he does actually share some of that durability still, or maybe it developed later in life. But yeah, we can see Sanji's love for food and cooking was present even before leaving for that line cook job on that random cruise, as he makes fried rice for a little mouse, which is adorable, which again, there's quite a bit of symbolism in this, as Sanji has the kindness and compassion to protect and help any being smaller and weaker than him. But not only that, Judge specifically mentions that royalty aren't meant to serve, and a rat or a mouse in media is often seen as the lowest of lows in terms of the social hierarchy, like the term street rat being thrown around everywhere when you want to really denigrate somebody. Sanji being able to even sympathize with these creatures shows the depth of Sanji's kindness. And I don't think it was an accident that Oda chose to have Sanji feed a mouse here. Judge also mentions Sanji's mother for the first time here, and we learn that she has passed away, but we don't know how yet. But it's also implied that Sanji was influenced into cooking by his mother, as he mentions to Sanji that his mother is dead when specifically scolding him about cooking. The other thing that always stood out to me about this scene is how Judge yells at Sanji for having no quote-unquote talent. But as we can see, even at this young age, Sanji has immense talent for cooking, among other intangible talents as well as like for his care of animals, his kindness, and his compassion. And it's not that he has no talent, it's just that he doesn't have the talent that Judge specifically values. Looking at this on a broader scale and relating it back to the real world, I think this is a very important message and thought to keep in mind, especially when looking at yourselves and others. We often look at and compare ourselves to others and think we're inadequate in some way, shape, or form because we aren't as talented in the strictest sense that can outwardly be seen or monetized. On the other hand, like with Sanji, we may have immense talent, but we aren't in an environment where that talent is neither valued or allowed to thrive. And this is especially true for kids. Kids are so often evaluated on academic and or athletic achievements, but some kids may be more talented in other ways that those metrics can't measure, or they may actually have those, but those talents can't be unlocked due to bad teaching or mentoring, or they're being directed towards the wrong things. In short, I think it's important to not let your blind spots be created by this sort of hyper focus on traditional talents and blind you to other hidden talents that you or others may have. You just kind of have to broaden your mind a bit and see where these talents can actually be applied to really grow and thrive. The other interesting thing to come out of this half of the flashback is learning about Reiju more. Reiju seems to be a bit different from the brothers, as she is the eldest at 24 years old in the present day, while the quadruplets are all 3 years younger than her. As a result, she seems to be on par in some cases in terms of like strength and agility and all that, and maybe even superior to Ichiji, who seems to be the most gifted among the brothers, as he's always shown to be in second or first. And while Reiju also comes in first often or second, the other way she appears to be different is that she has maintained some of her humanity compared to her younger brothers. Throughout the examination montage, we can see Reiju looking back to subtly check on Sanji during the foot race, or Reiju looking concerned after he was rescued from almost drowning during the swim race, while his brothers kind of look on in disgust while he's having CPR performed on him, but she does not laugh along with them there. And after the duel, we can see Reiju tending to Sanji's injuries, but also saying that she pretends to laugh along with her brothers for fear that they will bully her too, which is just sad. And this may be where Sanji's attitude towards women come from, as the only two people that seemingly were kind to him were his sister and potentially implied by Judge, his mother as well, who also may have been the inspiration for his desire to learn cooking. But with the knowledge that Sanji has no enhanced abilities and is by all accounts a normal boy, Judge does the unthinkable and imprisons Sanji in the dungeons in secret and declares to the rest of the kingdom that he had died, which is so messed up. And not only that, but because he can't bear to look at his face, he puts him in an iron mask, probably inspired by the story of the French prisoner who was secretly imprisoned in an iron mask. Although the real-life identity of this person is still a mystery, they did make a movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio in 1998 where he was where the man in the iron mask was the brother of King Louis XIV. The ending to these episodes is incredibly tragic and cruel, and you can even see that the brothers don't even really care about what happened to Sanji after hearing he died. But you can clearly see that while Reiju is putting on a smile, she is deeply uncomfortable with all of this. And the final scene of Sanji scared out of his mind and screaming out for help is so soul-crushingly heartbreaking. Sanji, like when you think about it, Sanji has been through so much abuse and trauma, yet he still managed to be one of the kindest people, albeit sometimes has incredibly uncomfortable flaws. But I think given the circumstances in which he grew up in, it could have been way worse. The moment that stood out to me the most is when you hear him crying, saying, "I'm sorry for being weak." It hits you like a ton of bricks. This one line, in context to how he was cast out of his family for simply being weak, puts into perspective why Sanji is always so protective and supportive of Usopp throughout the series. You see Sanji, and in particular during Water 7 in Enies Lobby, when Usopp was at his lowest, you saw him really trying to help Usopp. He knows what it's like to feel weak and having to apologize for it. The big moment that this revelation adds even more of a crushing detail to is that fateful moment where Luffy almost kicks Usopp off the crew. And Sanji's swift and harsh reaction makes so much more sense now, knowing all of this. Like, if you recall, in that scene when Usopp and Luffy are arguing over Mary, and Luffy almost kicks Usopp out of the crew because Usopp began complaining about how Luffy only looks forward and will abandon anything that's weak and can't serve him anymore, outwardly talking about the damaged Mary, but internally he was really conflating the Mary with his own doubts and insecurities about how he himself is too weak to keep up with the Straw Hats anymore at that time. So when Luffy almost tells him to leave, Sanji immediately kicks Luffy insanely hard in the face to stop him and scolds Luffy to never utter those words. And with this insight, this new flashback provides about Sanji, it explains exactly why he had such an intense reaction to this and stopped it right in its tracks. Sanji knows all too well what it's like to be kicked out of a family for the only crime of being perceived as weak. This was a trauma response from Sanji, and he was determined not to let his new family fall apart due to the same thing. It's really heartbreaking when you sit and think about it. That's why Sanji can be seen in the rest of that arc caring about and supporting Usopp so much. He wanted Usopp to know that he does have strengths and talents, and not just any strengths. He has these strengths and talents that no one else on the crew possesses. He just needed someone to believe in him, just as Zeph and Luffy did for Sanji. And this right here is why, despite its immense length, One Piece is so damn good upon rewatch or rereads, because so many of these new developments add so much more to past moments, and you just love Sanji and Usopp that much more after this, because it really provides so much to that journey that they faced in that arc and throughout the series. Like, you always see Sanji kind of looking out for Usopp no matter what. Even in Skypiea, you saw him do that, and you even saw that, in Fishman Island. And so, yeah, you see all of that, and I really love just that sort of bond that they have, because Sanji relates all too well to being the weakest person. And now that Sanji is in a position of strength, he always looks out for the little guy or little girl, and is always going to be there for them no matter what. And you also can see that too with his relationship with Chopper. I mean, we all know that Chopper has a closer relationship to Zoro and Robin, but even in moments when Chopper needs help, Sanji will always be there for him too, to kind of support him and to protect him as well. Unfortunately, though, the tragic flashback for Sanji isn't over yet, and we will have to wait till next podcast to see what's in store for Sanji and how he managed to escape this and end up on that cruise liner where we met him during his initial flashback. But that's where we'll have to stop for this episode. So if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. Those are really appreciated. It always makes me feel good. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram at SunnyGoPodcast for when I post updates, now that I am doing that again. So thanks for being patient with that. As always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. Spoiler section, I'll kind of go over some of the implications of cloning like I mentioned earlier. But if you're not interested in that, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye! Alrighty, so spoiler section. I kind of wanted to talk about the whole cloning thing, because this is basically the first time we get confirmation that cloning exists in the world of One Piece, and a lot is born out of this. and it's very interesting. So yeah, definitely the Weevil thing. I think it's pretty much all but confirmed that Weevil is a clone, particularly since Miss Buchan had a clone of her made in Stussy. And then we also know that both, when it comes to the whole Mads, the cover story, we know that or Miss Buchan or Stussy and the original Stussy, we see her with Caesar, Queen, Judge, and Vegapunk all kind of working together, and so it makes a lot of sense. And Stussy being so obsessed with Whitebeard, it also makes sense that she probably stole some kind of DNA from Whitebeard to create Weevil. And so, yeah, I think it pretty much all but confirmed that that's true. And then obviously, Vegapunk continued his sort of cloning research with the satellites and creating those. I mean, those aren't strictly clones because they're not really clones of him, but he puts his consciousness or pieces of his consciousness into them. But we do see at the end of Egghead Island and currently in Elbaf that Vegapunk did, in fact, actually create a full clone of himself, and that's the one he used to kind of escape Egghead Island and also visit Ohara, and is the one that Jinbei snuck out of Egghead, and now Lilith is trying to reanimate that clone to bring back Stella, essentially. And then, yeah, the Seraphims are also probably the next evolution of that cloning technology, in the sense that he cloned all the original Shichibukai and then enhanced them with Lunarian blood and green blood to be able to give them Devil Fruit abilities as well. So now they have not only Devil Fruit abilities and also the strength and durability of Lunarian, which is pretty insane. The Seraphims are absurd. And so, yeah, we'll see how that turns out. And so I think definitely we'll learn more about that, and I'll definitely go more into like sort of the Mads, and when we cover that cover story, as well as when we get introduced to Queen and more about all of that. But yeah, it is interesting that like cloning happened all the way back here, and then now we're starting to see the fruits of that plot line developing. The other thing I kind of wanted to mention is nothing to do with the cloning, but feeding the mouse. The mouse is really interesting, because it comes back full circle during the climax of Wano during his fight against Queen. And it's interesting because I feel like that is one of the major stepping stones that Sanji took to sort of put his past behind him in terms of Vinsmoke. But most recently, as of chapter 1187, we see that there might be yet another character development moment for Sanji in regards to his past. I thought before this last chapter that Sanji kind of like fully accepted and embraced sort of his monstrous past. Like we saw him be okay with, becoming a monster, quote unquote, if it was to help Luffy along his journey towards becoming the Pirate King. And we saw that during his fight against Queen. And at the end, we saw Sanji, protecting the Chuji, the mouse, and that sort of came full circle, which I really loved as a callback to this specific moment in these episodes. But now, and this is really spoilers for like the most recent chapter here in Elbaf, but we see that in order for Sanji to unlock Conqueror's Haki, he will need to really accept who he is and let the doubts go, because we see that the reason, or at least what Gaban has said, is that the reason why Sanji doesn't have Conqueror's Haki yet is because he doesn't possess the confidence that you need to be a conqueror and have Conqueror's Haki. And so we see that Sanji still may have some lingering doubts about who he is, his past, his lineage, and all of that. So it'll be really cool to see what happens going forward in Elbaf, to see like how Sanji manages to go beyond this. And it's frankly, yeah, again, really tragic and sad that Sanji, despite who he is now in the present, like how strong he is, how capable he is, how kind he is, how good of a person he is, and how talented he is in so many different ways, and yet he still carries around all this self-doubt. And and to the point where he can't unlock Conqueror's Haki. And it kind of makes sense why Luffy and Zoro already have it, is because they're so simple-minded that none of these thoughts even cross their minds. And so they're just like simple-minded to the point where it's like, yeah, I'm the greatest. To the point where sometimes it's even unwarranted how confident they are in specific situations. But Sanji has the self-awareness and the sort of the self-doubt to really internalize that. And yeah, it'll be really cool to see Sanji take that next step. But anyways, that'll be it for these episodes, so thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.